this discussion about open source and AI, will it survive, came up. So far, it's interesting to see that we still have Kubernetes and the Linux kernel and Containerd and hundreds and thousands of other projects continuing to march on. What I do see changing pretty rapidly is that those of us who maintain these projects are seeing a huge influx in security reports from people who are not traditional security researchers.
Hi, this is Brian Douglas, and you're listening to Open Source Ready, a bi-weekly series where we discuss the evolution of open source software and its impact on the tech landscape. Along with my co-host John McBride, we'll explore topics like open source AI, the business, and the life and sustainability of open source. Open Source Ready is brought to you by Heavybit, the leading investor of developer-first startups. For more information, visit heavybit.com. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us at x.com/opensourceready. Welcome to the installment of Open Source Ready. John, you are here.
I'm here. I survived. I survived the dentist.
Yeah, in the summer weather, all the changes.
Yep.
You guys have lightning storms up in the Northeast recently?
Yeah, it was nuts. New York was getting hit, and there were all these people like stranded in flooded interchanges and stuff. And yeah, our guest is also on the East Coast, so we can talk all the weather with Phil.
Yeah. So Phil, welcome to the show. We'll talk about quite a few things, but recently around containers, you had a really good talk about maintaining the maintainers and doing open source. But can you introduce yourself, but also tell us how the weather is in Virginia as well?
Yeah, nasty summer heat in Virginia. Lots of daily thunderstorms coming through, but thankfully no crazy flooding like up further north. But yeah, I'm Phil Estes. I'm a principal engineer at AWS. More people might know me from being fairly involved in kind of the open source container world for quite a while now. But yeah, so I end up sort of providing that link between the upstream open source container world and a lot of systems and services at AWS that run containers, and they all use open source software to do so.
Yeah.
And yeah, fairly involved in the cloud native, CNCF, OCI communities, as a byproduct of being involved upstream.
Phil, you're very humble. As somebody who used to work at AWS and on some container technologies, yeah, I think you're vastly understating your impact across the ecosystem. So yeah, we're really excited to just chat containers and the ecosystem and open source at large.
Sure, yeah.
I am so curious, and maybe this is kind of a gotcha question, but what is a container? What would you say is a container in this day and age of things that people say are containers that maybe aren't containers?
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question that people have been asking for quite a while. And especially, I think Docker ended up being somewhat of a lightning rod for people when they brought containers to the masses, I guess is one way we could say it. Because before that, a lot of people had been playing around with these concepts that were already in the Linux kernel, these idea of namespacing a process ID or a mount namespace, controlling it with resource limitations from C groups. So it's interesting that, what Docker provided has kind of become what we all say containers are, a set of file systems that are isolated in a sort of normative set of ways. And now we have the OCI that tells us, hey, here's a specification that tells you, you write this JSON and you can say, I'm isolated in these specific ways with these constraints. And we've all kind of come to accept that. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure we're going to be talking AI, and there's all kinds of people doing sandboxing these days, and some things look more like a traditional container and some don't. So yeah, the definition has always been fuzzy, and the OCI, sort of brought some normalcy to what we think of that. But yeah, smarter people than me have debated those things for a while. And, another AI insertion in the conversation is just all the security vulnerability work happening that, almost anyone can point at a code base, point a model at a code base and say, find me vulnerabilities. And, all kinds of interesting edge cases that maybe there are ways we thought isolation was working that it isn't. And I think AI will flush out more of that. But maybe I'm getting far ahead of our conversation starter there. But yeah, containers are interesting in that, unlike so many other principles in software, there is no one thing that we could say, this is a container.
Yeah, so like where we are today, like it feels like Docker definitely took over like a large portion of the market, like the mind share. Like my introduction to containers was Docker. And then we saw Docker like an attempt at an enterprise thing, and then like the company split. Like there's a whole other conversation that we don't have to bring in here. But then this thing like that had been around for a bit, like Containerd was a thing. Like there's some other like approaches for doing containers. Do you feel like what we have is what we document as containers, like it's a done primitive, and that like we can move on to the next stuff now?
Yeah. I mean, I think for a lot of the workloads that we're running today in containers, like I hate to say good enough because that's almost a negative connotation, but in the sense of like, we understand that world. Like you said, so many people came to containers via Docker and Docker build and Docker files and push to a registry and run. Like those concepts are just ingrained in maybe millions of developers now. That doesn't mean there aren't interesting potential approaches, but what we found, for example, in the OCI, and I've been around that community since it was launched. It was actually around COVID that I think people had more time on their hands sitting at home on their computers. And we ended up collecting kind of an online note that communities HackMD, markdown files. And so people generated a bunch of documents, and we ended up with all these discussions that were sort of humorously titled OCI v2. Not humorous in the sense of there can't be an OCI v2, but it was like, well, we're probably never going to do a v2, but like, what are the fresh ideas about, our tar files of layers, the best way to represent, this set of files we want to transmit and run as a workload. And, today, I'll jump a little bit, but, those conversations were great. But what we found at the time is it's really hard to move the industry now because of the sort of entrenchment of all the tooling we built around the concepts that Docker started with. And so, AeroFS, I would say, is one of the most impactful things in the last 24 months in the container runtime space. And it's sort of fitting, like we didn't have to create a new spec or a new model for how we build or run containers. There's some new tools coming around that. But I think to maybe get back to a more clear answer, it's just hard to do something drastically new in this space because we have so much tooling in place and operational and in production. And so I think a lot of what we'll see are incremental things like, AeroFS as a file system is bringing some performance and capabilities we didn't have with traditional OverlayFS. But it doesn't mean we have to come up with a new image format. Like, OCI v2 had some crazy ideas about, new ways to think about images. So I think that's where it's not that what we have is the end all, but it's very hard to sort of throw all that out and start over.
Yeah. Do you think because there's all this tooling and all these ideas that with how AI has moved so fast that everyone's like, oh, we need this totally new primitive that is an AI sandbox. And like, obviously there's security concerns or things that we want from maybe a microVM kind of architecture. But a lot of this was happening. And I was like, this kind of just sounds like the architecture of like a big container thing that you would just like want to spin up a bunch of them and then spin them down. Like that's like containers, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it is a moment of kind of research. I mean, for example, I was at the meetup where Intel proposed clear containers. This is like 2015. Docker is just barely a year or two old. And they're saying, hey, like, there's going to be breakouts. There's going to be issues with this sort of loose combination of Linux namespaces. you should really like wrap that in a lightweight VM. And then for 10 years, people have been playing with those concepts. Amazon created Firecracker, and of course, Lambda uses it. But the team at AWS also created the Firecracker Containerd plugin, and Kata containers has been around forever now. Which again, Intel was part of that. Clear containers kind of became part of that solution. So yeah, it's interesting that we've sort of had a lot of fits and starts in that, containers with a lightweight virtualizer. And I think sandboxes are just that's going to be the production use case that's going to bring us into that world where that's how we run containers now. We use very fast, minimal latency micro VMMs to run more traditional like container operations. And we see that in Containerd. There's a lot more interest in that space right now.
Yeah. It's really wicked tech. Like, it's so cool to see what Firecracker has been doing. And now the Lambda micro VM stuff has been really cool to see as well.
Yeah. And the cool thing about that is that came out of the managed runtime work we were already doing. And I think the team, again, I'm not on the Lambda team, but from my understanding, it's like, well, why wouldn't we give this, we're using this capability. Why wouldn't we give this to everyone else? And I think it has been exciting to see that as sort of a new primitive around simple way to run micro VMs.
Yeah. So could we talk about the AI space a bit too, as well? So I used to work at GitHub for like about 5 years, and like GitHub's had this like crazy first half of the year where it's like constant stretching and downtime, and like agents are definitely like putting it to its paces. I'd be curious, like from your purview, like where you're working on, like what do you see the world of agents changing how we're thinking about these different primitives?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's the huge meta topic of, is open source over? And as a Containerd maintainer, it's interesting to think that there could be someone out there next Monday who says, Containerd is silly, written in Go, I want it in Rust tomorrow. And could they do that, with enough Fable tokens or, whatever model of choice? Probably. Yet it's also interesting to see that we're over halfway through the year and we have some stories, Vue.js. We have some stories out there of people doing this, but I just had this discussion. I took a big trip to China a few weeks ago, and every young person there was talking about AI and using AI tools, and this discussion about open source and AI, will it survive, came up. But it's interesting again that I think the capabilities are there, and we do have a few of those stories, but yet it seems like for stable, mature projects, people are still wanting a foundation to rely on, that they know there's some expertise behind it. So again, there's that. I know that could be a whole podcast in itself, or 10 podcasts, but so far it's interesting to see that we still have Kubernetes and the Linux kernel and Containerd and hundreds and thousands of other projects continuing to march on. I think what I do see changing pretty rapidly is that those of us who maintain these projects are seeing a huge influx in security reports from people who are not traditional security researchers. And some of those match with, the kernel creators' very loud blog post this year that they're slop, and others are not. They're valid. They're findings that we have to go dig into and understand how to solve. And then just general contribution. We're seeing we as maintainers are using AI more for our own purposes. And we as a project, we see projects kind of falling on different sides of this divide. We don't like AI. We like AI. We accept AI contributions. And so our maintainer group is leaning in that this is a valid tool, useful to even accelerate our own, things that we want to do in the project. And so, our only request so far is just disclosure. And again, we know we can't enforce that. But yeah, it does make for interesting times. I think, GitHub as infrastructure has felt the pain of just this increase. of activity. And so far we haven't had major issues with the project, or, again, some of the infrastructure issues have been complicating factors to getting a release out. Hey, today our actions just aren't running. Well, okay, I guess we're going to release tomorrow. But in general, it hasn't been a catastrophe more than it's been definitely an interesting surge of kind of new activity.
Yeah, I'm curious though, because obviously, like thanks to like tools like OpenClaw, like the approaching of like making contributions on behalf of humans is like definitely a bit of an epidemic at the moment. Like, do you feel like with Containerd being like a CNCF project, do you think there's like more barriers to entry for AI to like open a bunch of nonsense?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if being in the CNCF or being sort of a core project that a lot of tools, higher layers rely on, like Kubernetes. The interesting thing is I think the project has had a barrier to entry in the sense of a container runtime is a bit niche. It's not flashy. It's not demoing Containerd, which I've done over the years in talks. I always feel embarrassed myself. Like, what do you show in a demo of a container runtime? Hey, it ran. Okay, my process is running. So in that sense, I feel like a lot of, when you look at like the CNCF, the mentoring programs where people join for a summer and work with a CNCF project, like we've rarely gotten a lot of interest. And that's totally fine. Again, I think because to choose to work on a container runtime takes a certain, I care about sort of infrastructure level, plumbing level concepts around how kernel namespaces turn into, a process that's running with certain isolation. So you could see that maybe AI would sort of blow the doors off that. Well, now I don't have to even know or care about those things. I can just ask AI to make contributions on my behalf. But interestingly, I'd say we've seen very little of that. I think in the first weeks, the OpenClaw was kind of exploding. We saw a few with like a claw something, and in the GitHub username, it's like, okay, someone's messing around with OpenClaw, but like it hasn't been a fire hose of like, oh wow, everyone's using these autonomous agents to point at Containerd and say, go make a PR. So yeah, because we're sort of a unique project in sort of our focus and what it is, maybe it's a little bit off the radar for the kinds of people that are playing around with those tools.
Yeah, fair enough. So I wanted to shift gears. And last year, I was actually at this KubeCon in Europe for KubeCon EU. London. It was London.
London, yeah.
Yeah. And you gave this talk about maintaining the maintainers. So yeah, really curious about like your take now in this. Well, I don't know if it changes for you because like it seems like there's already structure and like it's boring software until the world wakes up and like decides that there needs to be a change or a new container protocol. Do you feel like you're good? You could fly under the radar for a bit?
Yeah, like I said, it's been interesting to see all the stories, tweets, et cetera, about whatever prediction people make about open source and AI and the collision course that may or may not be in various communities. I think, again, so far, we do seem to fly under the radar in the sense that there are a core group of people who, in some sense, represent every major hyperscaler, including all the Chinese providers. That's our core group of committers, maintainers, reviewers. And that's been a pretty stable group for a long time. And so even as I look at our open pull request list or issue list, there are other parties, new names, first-time contributors in there pretty regularly. I haven't seen AI move the needle to where it's like, whoa, like now 10% of our contributions are quote unquote us, the sort of known quantities around Containerd, and now it's 90%. Who knows who these people are, or bots or whatever. So it's been interesting to feel like we haven't had that kind of impact yet, and maybe it's coming. Some of the maintaining the maintainers talk was really around this idea that that most of us have been in this community for a while. And that includes, you look at the sort of big names in Kubernetes, for example. How are we going to attract or get interest from kind of the next generation? And maybe AI helps there, but I think there also has to be sort of a necessary level of interest in the technology. And I think that's what's interesting to me, in the sense that I don't see a lot of, I think a lot of people consume Kubernetes and they consume container technology, and we get a trickle of new contributions, but, we don't see a lot of people stepping up to say, I want to work on this kind of technology and my employer allows it, or I'm an independent. So that'll be an interesting thing to keep watching in this space.
Yeah, and I'm curious, because there's a lot of companies and represent contributors for projects. Like John and I both work for the Linux Foundation for a moment. I worked with the CNCF when I was at the KubeCon previously. So there's a lot of investment of these companies, making sure the software moves forward and not just move forward, stay stable. But I'd be curious if there's any conversations around how do you prepare for what's coming, which is the sort of AI native wave. I don't know if you have any connections to the Agentic AI Foundation, but it seems like what they're doing is it's pretty cool, but it's also it's MCP, it's VLM. There's a couple other new projects that did, Goose is another one that's just joined. I just heard of rumors of new projects that are probably going to be joining pretty soon. So yeah, just curious, if there's any interactions with some of these more up and coming foundations, and or do they try to buy time or borrow time?
Yeah, one easy interaction I have with the AAIF is that my boss, David Nally, is the chair of the board of AAIF. So, a lot of conversations here on our team. I think you had Stormy on, who's a peer of mine, and she leads our open source strategy and marketing piece that David used to have, and he's well known in the open source world for his work with Apache and very connected to LF as well. The AAIF is obviously, was it at their big event in New York that they mentioned they're now the fastest growing LF kind of umbrella foundation?
Yeah.
So yeah, interesting to think what that does. CNCF has sort of been the king of foundation, so to speak.
Yeah.
And as far as KubeCon, Cloud Native Con has been massive for many years. Does that change the game, and where people who think they want to be involved in open source, do they sort of shift their focus? But I think there's a lot of collaboration there, because the people that work on CNCF projects are going to most likely be adopting AI tools and, creating MCP servers for interacting with their project. So definitely, there's that aspect. But it will be interesting to see, as much as, I'm a fan of kind of the collaboration that comes under these foundations. We know there's a lot of money that moves around, and the focus of large companies moves around with, these foundation memberships. So yeah, we both, myself, but our org within AWS and our open source strategy team, our goal is to, again, see that these projects remain stable and viable and supported and funded. And yeah, I think AI necessarily stretches that in a sense, because now there's more things to think about and more open source projects to consider. And that may require some, stepping up of activity and participation, and hopefully not losing, the old boring things that all this other new stuff is running on still has to be maintained. And, maybe AI helps with that to some degree.
Yeah. I'm curious what metrics you would look at, or your group would look at, to see that something maybe internally needs to change or something needs to change in the community. We had Dims on from the Kubernetes community last year sometime. And even then he was saying that we need to bring in new maintainers. We need to bring in a fresh pipeline of contributors that can then grow up to be maintainers and, inevitably lead a Kubernetes release or something. And I'm just curious what you could see at like your kind of unique purview of like all this stuff happening. Like, is it contributor pipelines? Is it like pull requests, PRs? Like, what kind of stuff are you looking at?
Yeah, that's interesting because I just had yet another discussion on like project health, and I think you guys probably know about the LF's works with LFX Insights. That DevStats was a piece
Yep.
of that puzzle for CNCF, but now Insights is broader, and there's been some churn around how do you clean this data, how do you validate this data.
We are all too intimately familiar.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a project we went into Linux Foundation to work with. So yeah, John and I work with the team closely.
Okay. So I'm touching close to home. Yeah, but it just seems like this evergreen issue of like how do you measure whether a project's healthy or not? Again, the OpenSF has done some good work with the scorecards, and that's more focused on sort of the security metrics around a project, and we've opted into that as Containerd. But one of the things that we do look at internally, and speaking of AI, we have someone on the broader team who wrote a very nice tool that now generates a weekly report of all the projects that we perceive we care about, and we can add to that and as time goes on. But yeah, it's, as usual, there are certain things that sort of are easy to track, but then need some kind of assessment. Like, okay, is more pull requests always better? Does that mean the project's healthier? Does that mean there's some problem or more issues, or more community activity, like the number of people opening issues and pull requests? So I feel like this has long been debated in open source, how you measure project health. But I think trajectory over time, read by people who've had a long sort of investment in open source, there's some amount of natural like understanding of, okay, I know that project just went through a big release cycle, so yeah, there's a dip while they sort of plan out the next cycle. But as you sort of zoom out, I think it starts to become clear when a project is sort of disappearing. Okay, there's been no commit for 8 months. That sounds a little strange, especially just in terms of dependency management. You should probably be updating things more than every 8 months in whatever language, dependency tree management you have. So that's what we're looking at, is like, what's our best estimate of activity and sort of freshness and release cadence, because those things at least can give you a trend that points toward, okay, I want to dig in here because maybe nothing's wrong, but it's a little weird to see this sort of different trajectory than we've been seeing. So that's kind of what we're using, and it's all imperfect in one sense, but yet valuable enough to give you hints where to look.
Yeah. It's a hard problem because like every metric can be very bespoke to like your own situation. So we're health for a project like Containerd would just be like, hey, like no one complained. Or like a project like Kubernetes is like, hey, are we like getting enough features into the future releases that people would care about? But also, how do you stay true to the project? I was asking about the AIF too as well, because I was thinking like VLLM is like a project that John was pretty close to. He built a lot of stuff with us at the last company we worked on. And I was actually surprised that went to the PyTorch Foundation, but it was like pre-AIF. But then there were a bunch of other projects that like would have made sense to go to the CNCF. So it's like, and I spent a lot of time with Jim Zimlin chatting about this when a lot of the stuff was actually like ideating. It's interesting because like, as you mentioned, CNCF, KubeCon, like the darling of the foundations. Now you have the AIF where like AI is definitely here to stay. Like we've got a lot of stuff to figure out. And I think this is like top of mind where I would put my money on like this foundation is going to help like build like more the bedrock of like what's to come. We might still have a lot of startups and labs that are still like slinging from the hip a bunch of random stuff, which I have a read about this as well, which I'd love to get your take on. But yeah, we're interesting times. Like a year ago, I would not have predicted like where we are today, where like the last time I opened up I've opened up Vim, but I don't open up for like the reasons I did a year ago, which is like I've had to like get my fine tooth comb and like change specific things.
Yeah.
Now I'm basically like, hey, file number, or not even file number. Like last time I used a file number was like forever ago. So maybe file and then like, hey, do this and expectations this, and then like let it rip. It's a different world.
Yeah, it's super interesting. As I mentioned, as a containerd maintainer core, thankfully we're all, we don't have dissent or a lot of wildly different opinions. But yeah, just an acknowledgement that like the way even our own maintainers are developing pull requests has drastically changed in the last year. Even simple things that, it used to be pretty straightforward, like, okay, we need to update our Go version across all containerd subprojects. Okay, that's grep and this and that, across a bunch of GitHub workflow files to do a big Go version update. And, you can still do it that way, but man, you tell Claude Code, like, go look at this. The last time we updated Go, here's a PR reference. Do the same thing with, the latest Go version. And like, instead of wondering if you missed a file or you fat fingered the grep that was looking for where we defined all the different Go versions. Like, yeah, it's just amazing how many workflows are different now. It can be vastly different.
Yeah, very cool. Well, Phil, I really appreciate the conversation. I think there's a lot to ponder about this current state of the world and really open source. Like, man, this is in 2027. Like, I do anticipate the world's going to look very different. I hope we're still here, and we're at least still controlling some of the knobs and the levers. But you gotta be flexible.
Yeah.
Cool. With that said, I got a question for you, Phil, which is, are you ready to read?
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
Read.
Excellent. So I actually had a read, which is very tangential to what we're just talking about, where I saw yet again another project has rewritten the result into Rust. So Cursor is definitely in vogue. They're, I guess, helping ship rockets at this point. I'm not sure whatever the correlation to SpaceX is, but yeah, they had a team of agents rebuild SQLite based on the original 835-page manual. I don't know if we needed this, but here we have it.
Yeah. I also want to know if they got their hands on the like big private suite of tests.
Yeah.
Isn't SQLite one of those that has like like you don't actually know, but you can like submit a patch and it'll be like, oh, you passed this like secret suite of tests that is in this foundation or wherever SQLite is. So it'd be very interesting to see if where they got some of this data to get to pass 100% of their internal tests.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to speculate. Okay. So this is, I'm going to speculate. So like, please don't strike this to record.
There you go.
But there was an article about Grok basically taking full sale private repos from localhost up to the model. So like, just pure speculations. I can't say this actually happened, but I could assume if they wanted the test, they could get it just by one prompt.
Wow.
Yeah, I saw that story as well about Grok.
So, Phil, you think do we need more stuff written in Rust at this point, or are we just getting started?
Yeah, I mean, definitely for infrastructure code, like Rust has been hot for a while. I'm not totally sure SQLite needed the Rust treatment, but hey, if it's just a bunch of agents and yeah, I mean, that's just the interesting thing about our times is that you don't even have to ask, should we do this? It's like, you can. If you want in Rust. In fact, one of the earliest tests I did with one of my own, it's not a private project, it's a public project, but, I have a tool that builds multi-arc Docker images and it's been around for years. And I always thought like it might be a fun thing to like use as my own learning tool for like rewriting it from Go to Rust. And every time I started, I got stuck somewhere and was too busy. So as coding agents, started to make that turn from like, oh, this is silly to, wow, this is amazing. I just pointed it at my GitHub repo and said, rewrite this in Rust. And I think it was 30 minutes later, I was actually running my own tool and pushing and pulling multi-platform images. I never validated that everything was 100% correct. But yeah, it's just interesting in that it's almost too easy to do these rewrites at this point. Now, the one point I've made when talking about AI tools, Rust's sort of validation at the compiler step and its very verbose like guidance for errors does seem to pair really well with LLMs as far as like letting it be very autonomous and fixing its own issues as it finds them, comparatively to other languages. So in that sense, maybe more Rust code is going to give us a leg up with LLM based, development.
Yeah. It's almost just a question of how many tokens do you have
Right.
in your budget?
Yeah, it's always interesting when the experiment is done by the company selling tokens. I guess that's not necessarily Cursor's case, but I know some of the past. Was it the GCC sort of implementation by LLM that was done by one of the big labs?
Yeah, it was. I think Anthropic did it. It was like Claude C compiler.
Yeah,
or something. That's what it was called.
So they had the tokens to blow on that.
Yeah. It's funny. I did actually recently look at this because I was looking back on like some old trends, and that was one of them where people were just like, "Oh my gosh, it like just went and wrote a C compiler, and you can like compile something, at least Hello World." But it's funny because they haven't gone back on it. I think it was more or less just like an experiment than anything. But it does make me always wonder the like knowledge toll that would take, like moving a project from like one technology to the next, like maintainers you leave behind if you were trying to bring along maintainers, how hard a tool like that would be to maintain in a community ultimately. So yeah, 100% for like personal tools. I've done this a bunch, but I'm so curious how it's going to go for the Bun community, since that was kind of like we're just going to riff this, we're going to ship it. And I think a lot of people, even in the community, were like, whoa, okay, like I spent a lot of time maybe getting good at Zig, and now I guess I got to get good at Rust, or at least prompting for Rust.
Yeah, I think that's a super interesting point, and something I have thought a lot about, these headline grabbers or reality, like Bun. They're doing it. Is, a lot of the history of open source has been based around trust of the maintainers, right? We think about the Linux kernel and we think of Linus Torvalds and Greg KH and the 50 other names that have been as prolific in that community. And so in a sense, like, we don't just trust the code because it's on GitHub or whatever, source control it's in. Because there's people behind it, and we trust that they really care about the quality of the project. And so,
right.
When I asked whatever, I can't remember the tool I was using at the time to rewrite manifest tool in Rust, and it ran, I kind of stepped away from it because, like, well, it seems right. But even myself, it's like, it felt kind of weird. Like, I didn't know Rust well enough at that point to go through everything it had generated in 30 minutes and validate that it really was the sort of truest implementation of what the intent of my project is. But it doesn't matter because it's just my thing. And yeah, I have some users, but yeah, I'm very interested in this crossover from like how we've trusted open source because we trust the people maintaining it, and how AI rewrites change that game. And do we still trust sort of this output that maybe none of them fully understand every line of it?
Yeah, 100%. I think I had a read as well, which was maybe slightly related to this. This was a fun little article about stealing Claude memories from people's like Claude sessions and stuff. And it was exactly this. It was like this guy basically proved a proof of concept exploit using like a small little tool that you would like distribute. And maybe everything like this is just like an SDK that you can distribute for a supply chain attack or, a small little binary or whatever. But it was just fascinating because I don't think people realize the like things they're like telling to Claude or OpenAI, ChatGPT. Mine would probably be very boring. Like this guy uses Go and this guy likes, I don't know, Tmux or something. But there is like a whole swath of people who are, I don't know, on some like plane of AI psychosis, maybe, talking to them like a therapist. It's a crazy article. I definitely recommend the listeners go read it. But yeah, Brian, what would your Claude say about you if I stole the memories?
Stole the memories, man. It definitely, this guy does know what he's talking about. What I love about AI is I get to ask all the dumb questions first to the AI. Like, okay, I'm looking at this PR. Like, what am I looking at? Like, what can we do this? Can we do that? Like, what was the intent here? So I think in a world that we are remote and like it's been a while since I've been like sitting in an office with somebody and like be, hey, John, question about this thing. Now you're like thinking about taking away time from people. So yeah, I tend to ask a lot of like random questions. I just recently did like a dump of like a bunch of like conversations with users and stuff like that. So there's a lot of like Socratic method like conversations back and forth. So that again, it'd be like, man, this guy keeps asking himself like asking himself questions to himself. But that'd be mine. Hopefully not a lot of secrets in there, like tokens or API keys.
Yeah, 100%. Phil, what about you? What secrets are in there?
What's funny is I don't remember making this decision, but I have both ChatGPT and Claude, like personally, like outside of work. And I never talk to ChatGPT about technical things. I've asked it crazy things like, we have a bunch of like almost adult kids. And so I basically have a fleet of vehicles at this point, which is depressing. But, they're always breaking down and some shop tells me I need 800 different things. And I upload the estimate and ask ChatGPT, like, here's the model of the car, here's the mileage, like help me out, help me save money.
Yeah.
So anyway, ChatGPT is like my personal life. And then Claude is like all my technical, like, hey, help me update my very out of date personal website, single page application stuff.
Yeah.
So it's pretty funny. It's like I'm very split brain in my tech Claude and my private life ChatGPT. But ChatGPT has surprised me a few times because now I've been kind of doing that for a few years. And I'll ask it something and it's like, hey, there was this time you talked to me about whatever. Are you wanting to, do this, go on this trip and or take this vacation? So it was a little surprising, like, ooh, yeah, there's a lot of stuff on me somewhere. But yeah, sadly, probably not too exciting other than you might learn about all the cars I own and their problems.
I do like that. I actually haven't thought about like updating like previous service records into like a RAG or basically in the memory. And then like, because I've done it for a PC I built. So it knows about my PC.
Yeah.
So I'm ever like thinking about like other things I want to do with it or what other things I want to run on it. Like ChatGPT knows it. But if my car, it sounds genius. Like I want to get an old car, like a truck, and just like start from zero. And then now this thing just knows.
Yeah.
But hopefully it doesn't hallucinate on you and like tell you to like replace the head gasket or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've actually done this with music gear before where I'm like, I have this, and this guitar, pedal, amp, whatever. Like, how can I get in like a Jimi Hendrix tone or something? It's kind of the bane of every guitar player is like dialing in the tone.
Right. Yep.
But I've had it before be like, oh, I know that you own this pedal. You should actually use this pedal. And then I'll be like, oh my gosh, you're so right. And it knows, it's even told me before, like, oh, this circuit is much closer to a circuit from, 1969 or whatever in this pedal that you have versus the one you're trying to use or versus the one that, you're looking at buying or something. And then I'll just be like, okay, sure. And I still can't dial it in. So it doesn't always work.
You got to add the I guess Ticket Machine's got audio built into it. Yeah, you need the state of the art models now at this point. So
Yeah. Hear the tone.
dial up the inference.
Yeah. There we go.
Well, with that, this concludes our conversation, Phil. We just want to thank you for chatting with Reeds with us, sharing some of your insider baseball knowledge about maintaining the maintainers. And listeners, stay ready. That's all the time we have for today. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us at x.com/open-source-ready. Open Source Ready is brought to you by Heavybit, the leading investor of developer-first startups. For more information, visit heavybit.com.